Join us for the second half. Hope you enjoyed your lunch. Good afternoon. Thank you. Welcome back. We are just a few minutes behind schedule. That's fine. Coming up next to kick the afternoon off, we have Dan Pidcock. And Dan's worked for clients such as Just Eat, Microsoft, Clarks, Honda, and Royal Navy. And he's the creator of the Atomic UX Research and founder of Gleanly. He tells me his first paid graphic design gig was at 14 years old, and he went on for his first proper job designing bathrooms for millionaires such as Sting and Madonna. Unfortunately, his presentation is not about that today, but I'll leave Dan to talk to you about Atomic UX Research.
Thank you so much, Paul. Yeah, that would be much more interesting, actually. I'll have to do a talk on that next time. And also, I should say, for Paul, I've used people for research for many years, and they really are the best at what they do. So shout out to them. So how is everyone? Are you all fresh after lunch? Yeah, good. Because I've got a lot to tell you. Originally, this talk was nearly an hour long, and I managed to reduce it down to 30 minutes, but I'm going to talk fast. And I've got a lot to share. And especially because I don't want you to miss what Kate's got to tell us, because I'm really looking forward to that. I'm sure you guys are too. So I'm Daniel Pidcock, UX designer, researcher, creator of the Atomic UX research process and founder of Gleanly. And I've been talking about Atomic UX research now for a few years. So some of you may have heard about it already. For those that haven't, I'm going to give a bit of background and go through the basic concepts of what tools, the process, and how you can try it yourself. And as I mentioned, I founded and created Gleanly, which is a tool dedicated to this process. But everything I'll tell you about today, you can do with whatever tools you're already using or any tools you prefer to use. There's no specific tooling needed. So we'll discuss best practices, taxonomy, management, and a few other things that I hope will be interesting, useful, and most of all, actionable for everyone here. So where did it all start? As Paul mentioned, I used to work for Just Eat. World's biggest food marketplace. And I recently had founded and was leading the accessibility team. And this team was unusual. I've just realized, actually, I need to use this, don't I? So this is what we're going to be talking about today. Take it in really very quickly. Where did it all start? So yeah, I was working at Just Eat. And yeah, I founded the accessibility team. And this team was unusual that had representation from every part of the company. And accessibility affects every part of a company, doesn't it? So it was great because the organisation and the company had really got behind the idea of being more accessible. And there was lots of passionate people across lots of countries and lots of departments, lots of different brands even. However, it did mean that we had an avalanche of research and reports coming in from all around the organisation. And for our little team, it was almost impossible to manage. Now, the biggest issue we had was that knowledge was being delivered in the form of reports, which obscured the insights. And it made it hard to quickly gather information and find out what we already knew about a subject. But when we pulled the insights out of the reports, we lost that valuable context. So we're trying to work out how to deal with this, and I decided to focus on how we could theme research to make it more discoverable. And the idea was that within those themes, we could have specific insights, and then researchers and people supplying knowledge could connect what evidence they had to support an insight. And then if they had new insights that didn't seem to be covered already, they could create a new theme, and others might say, oh, I've got something for that, and they can add their research to that one as well. And in this way, we had self-managing nodes of knowledge. Now, we realized one piece of evidence could support multiple insights across multiple teams. This is where it started getting complicated. Even more so when we started turning those insights into actionable recommendations, which could be supported by multiple sources. It just became unmanageable again. So it was time to formalize this process and work out a way to deal with this. Now, I'm often credited as the inventor of Atomic UX research. In fact, I just introduced myself as that at the beginning of this. But it's important to mention this work came about due to collaboration with many people and inspiration from other existing processes and systems. One person I particularly want to shout out, David Yates, a great UX designer now looking after Superdry. And David gave me the first a spark of this process when we were talking about the problem, and he was drawing on a whiteboard. And what he was drawing really reminded me of the Atomic Design System by Brad Frost. And this is a process we were using successfully already. I thought if we can break down a complex UI design into small atomic parts to make it easier to manage, perhaps we can do the same for knowledge. So after a lot of work, finessing with many people inside and outside of Just Eat, this is what we came up with. A deceptively simple process with 4 distinct parts or atoms that create molecules of knowledge. And it starts with experiments. This is what we did to discover the knowledge. It can be anything from a small-scale study to overhearing someone on a bus. It gives us context for the facts. And the facts are what we learned, our findings. A good fact is a quote, observation, or statistic, but the reason we call it a fact rather than a finding is it's never our opinion, and I think that really helps keep people focused on that. So insights are our opinion of why the facts are the way they are. This is often the cause or effect of the evidence, the connection between the fact and the recommendation. So finally, recommendations are what we think we should do with this knowledge, the actionable result of what has come before. And most recommendations are testable, which creates new experiments, and the cycle continues. And this is the secret we found to scaling a knowledge repository, which both retains the what and the why certain decisions were made, but importantly, what happened after. And each of these atoms connect together to create a molecule of knowledge. And actually, a lot of people call this a nugget due to the great work that Thomas Sharon's done on this subject. But that simple process becomes really powerful when you see it from the perspective of those elements. So what we're seeing here is a molecule or nugget from the perspective of a fact. This is usually the perspective we use. I can't say that word. This is the perspective we use when creating knowledge and synthesizing our findings. A fact always belongs to an experiment because how it was learned is intrinsic to that fact. But a fact can be connected to many insights. Now, this is great because we might have several ideas of what the evidence is telling us, and we don't need to argue about one idea. We can think broadly and explore lots of reasons. It's also important that we can connect negatively to an insight. That's what the red dashed line going down represents. This fact is evidence for these 2 facts, insights at the top, and evidence against that insight below. So let's look at it from the perspective of an insight. You can see here that the insight is connected to lots of facts across 2 experiments. There's no limit to the number of facts or experiments it can be connected to. We can have evidence from all parts of the organization. And both have evidence that support and disproves our theory. We can see that it's connected to several recommendations. Once again, we can have lots of ideas springing from one insight. So I like to synthesize with my cross-functional team, and having the ability to have a range of ideas is really wonderful. I'm from a design background, a UI background, and designing bathrooms as well, but but I'm definitely biased towards solving problems with UI. But a database analyst, for instance, may have innovative ideas that just never occurred to me. So being able to have that broad way of thinking is really useful. Now, this view is also the view that researchers tend to really like as well. If I'm looking at other people's research, is how I tend to view it. I'm most interested in what you learn, the evidence behind each insight, and perhaps interested but less interested, curious to what you're going to do next. But this view is the one that stakeholders and decision makers love. We want to be able to show them the recommendation, along with the thinking or insights that led to this idea and the evidence that supports each of those insights. We're able to show them a holistic view that makes it clear what evidence we have for and against, and allow them to make informed decisions. Stakeholders can also understand the evidence at the level that makes sense for them. You know, they can quickly scan the insights and glance at the evidence, or they could go really deep, exploring each and every single element on here to get an in-depth understanding of the facts that we've learned and how we learned them. And what's great for us as researchers, we don't need to share this one molecule, and the stakeholder can self-manage the level of detail they prefer. Our feedback, we did a survey last year with some of our clients, and we saw that it reduces the process of reporting by up to 80%, between 60 and 80% for most organizations. So after a lot of work on this process with lots of people, I wrote an article on Medium, and this was my first article, had no following, but it was viewed 40,000 times and sparked a conversation. It's gone around the globe, and I knew it was really getting big when it became the foundation for the European Commission research team. And now many organisations, from massive tech companies to government institutions, are using this process to manage their knowledge. And it's very much taken a life of its own. Many people have their own methods and tweaks and processes to make it work better for them. This is something I very much support. Every organisation's different. So take what I'm telling you today as a starting point, but feel free to use it, squeeze it, squidge it, rip it apart, and use it as you wish. But with that in mind, let's talk about some practicalities of how we can use this in our work. Let's start with tools. So the most simple and obvious way to get started is with good old sticky notes, or maybe using a digital tool like Miro. This is also how I began using and testing the process within teams. And I see many people still using this for affinity mapping and synthesis to get started. So you can see here that we've affinity mapped the findings at the top. The next level was insights, and the bottom is recommendations. And we simply drew connections with whiteboard marker. Green connections for positive and red for negative. Really simple. So this works great for group synthesis. It's very visual, very tactile. It can get messy if you've got a lot of research, especially if you're trying to connect, a fact from this side of board to a recommendation on the other. That can be become spaghetti. But it's not so great for sharing. It's not really a storage or sharing tool. But I see a lot of people using this method as where they're starting, maybe a Miro or whatever tool they're using, and then exporting into a repository tool afterwards. So Airtable is a bit better as an actual potential repository tool. So this is what we moved on to after good old whiteboards. So this is great for remote teams. The way that we set it up was insights and recommendations were set up as tags so we could reuse them very easily, and it's really, really simple to see which were most common. The issues we did have with this is that it was very limited in scale. You can connect to lots of experiments and lots of tables, but it's very easy to break or get confused. And it wasn't very accessible for non-researchers. So that said, there's a few Airtable bases that are set up to get you started. So this one is by Thomas Sharon, who I mentioned earlier. He's been a really big thinker in this space, really influential. And probably one of the reasons it's got as much steam as it has because of his talking about it. So he's got this Airtable space called the Polaris one that he actually set up when he was head of research at WeWork. And it's really useful. It can be a little bit focused on the specific needs of WeWork. And actually, I think this one might be more approachable for most organizations, especially more digital organizations, by Martin and Guillaume at Devoteam. So they're using this for their consultancy clients, and they've shared it with, for free for everyone else to benefit from. So we tested so many products and tried different methods to find something that ticked all the boxes, and it became clear that we needed a dedicated tool built around atomic research. So I actually built an MVP with my colleague and friend David Barker, working with about 5 large UX teams in different companies to build it around their real-life needs. In 2020, we got some VC funding, which allowed us to hire a team, and we've launched a fully realized atomic UX repository in October of last year. We now got thousands of users, from individual researchers to very large blue-chip organizations using it. And we created Gleaner because we wanted a tool built for purpose. But I just want to make it really clear again that everything I'm talking about today should be possible, more or less, with other tooling. So in that mind, let's talk about best practices. First, it's important to understand where Atomic sits in the knowledge journey. Later, we'll discuss what makes a good fact. What makes a good fact, a good insight, and good recommendations. But one thing that doesn't make good facts is raw data. This process assumes a certain amount of processing or analytics beforehand. So survey data is a really good example. It's not helpful to record a fact such as respondent 73 answered yes to question 5. It's meaningless. We want useful human knowledge that helps people create actionable insights. So we want to create the raw data, turn that into findings, and then synthesize that into understanding so we can make better decisions. Those decisions are actioned, and then we need to review and test and see if they worked, and this starts the loop again. The good news then is that you can keep on using the tools and methods that you love. They create the data and turn it into something consumable. And this is when it comes into the atomic flow as a fact. We make those facts available to everyone, democratizing research. And those facts are processed into insights and then recommendation, allowing us to make decisions, which is then handed over to project management tools such as Jira. And then back around to testing and review, handing back to the data collection tools to ensure what we did has worked. So on the left here, I'm showing a few analytic tools you might be already familiar with, but these are just examples. Anything can be a source. The output, they output the facts that can then be used to make better decisions. So what about if you need to combine knowledge that isn't user research based? I mean, this is User Research London, so of course, I'm talking to UX people here, but the most common need of people I speak to, probably about 1 in 3 people I speak to, is to de-silo research. For example, we know that marketing have lots of useful data. Customer support has loads of things we want to know. Sales, business strategy, perhaps even management. Is it possible and is it appropriate to include other types of knowledge? Well, actually, I think this is a particular strength of atomic research because it's completely agnostic to source. If it's evidence-led, it can go in. So at Gleanly, we have lots of non-UX teams using the platform. Certainly, I believed it was a UX tool when I started, but very quickly realized that it's a knowledge tool, right? The most unusual is a criminal investigations team studying murders. In a murder inquiry, you have lots of evidence from the physical crime scene evidence, observed evidence such as CCTV, interview statements, lots of data, DNA, and even digital more and more. We've all got the smart devices on us. And it's really hard to bring these different types of evidences together in a useful way. But Atomics help with that. It's helping people solve murders. Wasn't expecting that, I have to say. So if we can include knowledge from different disciplines, should we also be including everybody in the organisation into the organisation as well? If I can get my words out. And the answer is, of course, a resounding yes. I love what Bezold was saying earlier this morning because he's completely correct that everyone in a company is doing research. Everyone has knowledge. Of course, someone needs to manage and own the repository, and that tends to be the research team, but where possible, everyone should be part of it, and not just as a consumer, as a contributor as well. And in fact, more and more I see organisations reaching Jared Spool's highest level of UX maturity, something that he calls infused UX design, where everyone in a team has a certain level of research fluency. Now, part of that is because companies are seeing the value of research, and there's not enough of us researchers to go around. But it also becomes more and more common that research teams are responsible for managing the wider organisation than outright creating it. It's a theme that's been, I think, going on in the talks today. Navigators, as Bizzles mentioned earlier. So the good news is Atomic acts as a useful framework for non-researchers to work with him. It forces people to think about the why rather than just jumping straight to the solution. It's so easy to say, the customer did this, so we're going to do that. But actually thinking about what connects the two can be quite difficult, but it's really powerful. And I often hear this from even really experienced researchers. I thought I understood my research until I started synthesizing it through this process, and it caused me to think differently and more broadly and maybe with a bit more clarity. Also forces people to think about the evidence they have for an assertion and keep themselves evidence-led, unlike this example here. They need to divide their beliefs from the evidence themselves. And of course, it's possible to game the system. Of course it is. But it also becomes really obvious. When the evidence doesn't reflect what's being proposed, we can spot that. And being able to combine existing research from other projects reduces the pressure on everybody, but it also helps teams build a case for ideas, or sometimes against ideas. We tried that already, remember? So this is probably a good time to mention that we don't need to work left to right, fact to recommendation. It might be that someone has an idea and we can add it as a hypothesis. We can start from that point. If it's actionable, it'd be a recommendation. If it's more of an assertion, it can be an insight. And next we can work backwards to see what evidence we have to support or disprove those ideas. Then create experiments to fill the knowledge gaps. So going back to Atomic as a useful framework for non-researchers is the management of quality. And remember, this process started from a need to be hands-off and allow people to self-manage their knowledge and a repository to scale on its own. And this means that a small team, or even just one person, can manage the knowledge for actually really quite a large organization. One key piece of advice I try to instill is to be light touch. And this can be really difficult for us researchers that want everything to be perfectly coded and filed away. And I often tell people that it's better to get poorly coded research into your repository than risk losing it. After all, if it's not there at all, it's never going to be found. For traditional insight repositories that rely heavily on tagging and coding, this can be a problem. If it's not tagged, it doesn't exist as far as the system's concerned. However, with Atomic, when we connect a fact to an insight or an insight to a recommendation, we're creating relationships between the two items. And you could say we're coding via stealth. In the example above, the researcher's been really good at coding their insights and recommendations, but the facts have not been tagged at all. So maybe they're in a rush, maybe they didn't understand coding, or they were just being lazy. It doesn't matter really, because if we found any of the 5 cards shown above, or any of the others connected from other experiments, I will find all of these assets. Now, I just want to be clear, this isn't to say that taxonomy isn't important. Of course it is, it's very important. Any repository that's well coded will work better than one that isn't. But with Atomic at least, it's not an imperative, it's not a blocker. So it's better that research is there than not at all. But of course, we still want the best quality. And also consistency is really important. So what does good Atomic UX look like? So this is our Atomic UX research cheat sheet. I want to do a big shout out for Marielle de Geest, who did a lot of the thinking around this. She's absolutely amazing at turning quite complicated concepts into really easy to understand language. So this can be downloaded and kept if you find a use for it. There's a QR code just there, or pop me a message and I'll send you a copy. So it starts here with experiments. As we said, this is what we did to discover the knowledge. It's also the most commonly changed terminology. UX people, we're always talking about terminology, aren't we? And yeah, this is one, a lot of people find this too formal, and I can completely understand why. Some good alternatives might be study, or activity, or source is a really good one as well. But the job of an experiment container is to give context for the findings. So I suggest including as much detail as you can about the experiment, what we did, the experiment design, prototype scripts, all of this can come in really useful for helping people understand our research. And to that end, here's some good ideas around taxonomy as well. This is going to be difficult, so I can't actually see now. So experiment classifications should aid discovery. They need to provide context for the facts and communicate how they were learnt. So methodology is a really important one there. The product, service, or country, what we were studying, the platform we were studying on, who we were doing it for, the department or team, and of course the subject matter, what we were trying to learn. The date probably doesn't fall into taxonomy, but it's really important to know when was this research done and undertaken. And facts, as we said earlier, facts are what we learn. A good fact is a quote, observation, or statistic, but it's never our opinion. So here's some really good examples. I can't find the invoice section for quotes. An observation of participant took 6 minutes to find the invoice section. 14% of support calls are clients looking for invoices as a statistic. That pretty much covers almost all research that you'll find to a certain extent. The important thing is they're unbiased and hold no assumptions and short enough to be read in a few seconds. And when it comes to taxonomy, the experiment, as we said, it tells us how it was learnt, i.e. a moderated user test. But the facts need to tell us who told us, give us clues about the demographics or sentiment, where they were at the time. Or for quant data, things like date range, factors, and other factors that allow us to reproduce the data. So some of this might be in the fact itself, so it doesn't need to be in a separate taxonomy, but it does no harm to have a structure in place, and that's that consistency once again. One common mistake I see are facts listed as insights. So a good example I often use is a client of ours, a French fashion house. They had a survey data showing a strong colour preference for their customers. So this is not actually what they had, but let's say it's showing the majority of their customers preferred the colour green. Well, they were referring to this finding as an insight, but I disagreed. This finding came about from the survey, from what the survey respondents told us. It's not our opinion, therefore it's a fact. And it's also the beginning of an exciting journey of discovery. We can look for more data from other sources to give us a better understanding. Do we see this preference reflected in sales data, for instance? What is it about our brand that attracts green lovers? Where we can see gaps in knowledge, we can look to run experiments to fill them. And as we build and connect these different nodes of knowledge, we build a picture that helps us understand the cause and the effect. What does it mean to us that so many of our customers prefer the colour green? Should we look to promote our brand to a more diverse range of colour preferences, or should we lean into it and we're now the company that makes green clothes? That's fine. So an insight should try and include the context and the cause and the effect of evidence. It's the connection between the evidence and the action, the fact and recommendation. So in this case, customers can't find invoices in the footer, context, because they see invoices as related to their personal account rather than the product, which is the cause. So they call the contact center effect. Short, easy to understand, and backed by evidence. An insight taxonomy should help give us context we need if we need to be looking at it in isolation. So if we test this in Italy, it's important to know if I'm in Japan. And this could be good evidence that there's something here, but our cultures are different enough that we need to retest this. The type is also interesting as well. So we've got principle, something that affects every part of the organization. Strategic, something particular to our team or feature, but guides our strategic thinking. Tactical insights are likely to be very specific to a very particular use case, like the one example I just gave you. And I think it's also very important to make clear when the insight is specific to a prototype. We discussed earlier we might need to add an insight as an assertion or hypothesis. So I'll talk about obsolete in a second. Finally, a recommendation looks complicated. It's got 5 different parts, but we don't need all of these, and actually it's quite simple. So what we have is action, move the invoice history to profile settings, context from the footer, the audience, so that customers, benefit, can find them better. The measurement is which will reduce calls for the contact center, and we can test that. So it needs to be short enough to be consumed in a few seconds, contain enough context to be understood in isolation, and most of all need to be retestable. So as well as context, we want to give status and prioritization. Some statuses, example statuses here, we've got an action. So that means it's waiting for a decision to be made. If the stakeholder looks at the evidence and doesn't have the confidence to make a decision, they may require more evidence. And with that evidence, they might reject our recommendation, or they might approve it. This will send it to the backlog to be completed, and once it is, it will need retesting. And we've already covered the idea that a recommendation might be a hypothesis. We're looking for evidence to support it rather than being something that's evidence-based originally. So going back to that obsolete tag, people often ask, this recommendation is being completed, or this insight is in relation to something that's changed or is obsolete. Should I delete it? My answer is always no. We should never delete anything. Our repository should be a record of what we know, what we knew, how we're thinking, how we thought, and what we did. If you delete anything, you lose that provenance and will cause people to have to relearn or make the same mistake again. So if something's no longer current, just mark it as complete or obsolete if necessary. The only exception is if we have some data that's based on an experiment that failed. Perhaps we had an A/B test that went wrong, there was a bug in it. That could be what, because it's not fact anymore. So what about legacy research? If we got old research and report, it would be great to have that in your repository. Does that mean we're going to have to go through all of our old research and break it down into atomic? That sounds exhausting to me. And that would be great. Of course, it would be great, but in reality, it's going to be a blocker, and it's going to be a barrier to getting your repository off the ground. And remember, it's better that research is there at all than in a perfect state. So one trick I've seen used successfully, kind of a shortcut, using experiments as a container. We can add each report as a fact, make sure it's all tagged, and make it discoverable. And then maybe if someone picks it up and goes, actually, this report's really useful for what I'm working on, they then can post that in, and all that information gets brought in via osmosis. Now, I'm going to be really brief on this because I'm running out of time, but you may have noticed evidence score and wondered what that was. So this is simply a cumulative score of all the evidence. Each factor is worth 1 or +1, -1, whether it proves or disproves. So this is just a real rough idea of how much we know about how much evidence we have for something. It doesn't tell us how important something is or how true something is, just how much evidence we have with it. And sometimes we need a lot of evidence to make a decision. Sometimes you need a little bit. And this can really help us move quickly. I'm sure you've all been, any designers in the room have been told, like, we need to get a wireframe out tomorrow. I haven't got time to do any research, I haven't got time to read through reports, but I can skim through the insights we have on that subject, and the evidence score allows me to understand that. Now, with the few seconds I've got left, here's a summary for some of the benefits of the atomic design process. So it removes personal bias, encourages retesting, forces you to think about the why, often leading to more innovative solutions. It gives a good framework for non-researchers, and that's all to do with the synthesis. For the repository, it allows scale with low management. We get a holistic view of the evidence for the whole organisation, evidence for and against, which is really important, and allows us to move quickly with confidence, encourages collaboration, and smooths tagging issues. And I just want to leave with this thought. Nearly everything I have to say, it can be like kind of boiled down to this in consideration. So Tom earlier asked the question, what is research helping our stakeholders to do? And research repositories are not for researchers. They're for decision makers. They are the end users. Everything, often a researcher may also be the decision maker, especially for those of you that are UI, product, or service designers. But whatever we do, no matter how thorough our research, how perfect our coding, none of it has any value if it doesn't help those that need it. And this is why I'm so passionate about knowledge management, sharing information, making that information digestible, but ultimately helping people make better decisions. So thank you so much for listening to me today. I've gone a little bit over. I'm so sorry. It's a drop in the ocean, surely. I'd love everyone to try the process out. If you find some benefit in Gleanly, please do jump on. But as I say, anything we've talked about today can be done with probably existing tools you already have. So please get in contact if you give it a go. Tell me if you've changed things, if you've had different solutions. But thank you so much for the time today. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, David. And thank you, everybody, for listening.